Good morning, friends and fellow treasure hunters. The topic of today's video is, do the Knights Templar still exist? And I know there's been a few videos about this around the internet, the YouTube. It's a topic that's been talked about. There's quite a bit of interest in it. But I want to talk about some of the evidences and things that, if I can find my notes here, there's a lot of cryptic information out there about the Knights Templar, but I want to just take the information that we really have, that's not based on hearsay, but has founded in some evidence. And we know that at one point the Catholic Church, the King of England, the King of France, the King of Spain, they all conspired together to get rid of the Knights Templar. The one exception was the King of Portugal. That was a haven for the Templars at one time. New evidence has come forward, and it's pretty well documented, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later and give credit where credit's due. But basically, what happened was when the Templars got very powerful, very wealthy, they had been exempted from paying taxes by the Pope. They were given a lot of privileges and things that no other group at that point had received, and as a result they became very wealthy. I think that the kings, the church, eventually at some point began to fear the Knights Templar. I think they began to fear that they may take over their nation, have too much power over the church or over the things that were going on. And just like anything, that kings or people in power are jealous of that power, and they seek to eliminate or destroy what they see as competition or as a threat. One of the things that really tempted the kings, and I'm sure the church, was the vast wealth that was amassed by the Knights Templar. As a result of not being taxed, as a result of all the donations that were given to them, as a result of all the raids and things they made that they took from the Arabs and from the outlaws and the different things that were attacking the pilgrims and people that were going to Jerusalem, they amassed a large amount of wealth in a very short period of time. Because the Knights also took vows of poverty, one of their vows was of poverty, because they worked as a group and they had very great because of their great organization, they amassed wealth. They worked together. They had individuals or people that were farming, were raising animals. They were very talented stonemasons and carpenters, and as a result they were able to build their own structures, they were able to do their own work, and they amassed great wealth as a result of it. I'm going to read a few things here about the Templars, the time period, the time frame, and why they came into being, and who started the organization. Basically, the Muslim army had conquered Jerusalem and the Holy Land, ending the Christian rule in the region under the Byzantine Empire, called the East Roman Empire. By the end of the 11th century, the Byzantine Empire had lost more territory to Muslim invasions, including more Christian holy sites. As a result, in 1095, Alexios Komnenos, the Byzantine Empire from 1081 to 1118, asked Pope Urban II for assistance in fighting the Muslims. His call for help was a desperate call because his empire was on the brink of collapse. In response, the Pope called for the capture of the Christians' holy sites in the Holy Land, beginning in the First Crusade. And of course, we've all heard of the Crusades and of all the battles and things that were fought. There were several different Crusades, and they lasted hundreds of years. Okay, so a multinational army was raised for the Crusades, led by several of Europe's monarchs and nobility. Ultimately, these Crusades recaptured much of the Holy Land. They created 4 territories known as Crusade states: County of Edessa, the Principal of Antioch, the County of Tripoli, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Okay, so after this, most of the Crusaders returned to Europe, but there remained a big need to be able to defend these sites that they had taken. There were bandits. There was always the threat that the Arabs would rejoin or would, gather forces and come back against the city. If anybody knows anything about the Jews and the Arabs and their family feud, which that's basically what it is, the Jews and the Arabs, the Jews and Muslims were brothers back in the day, and basically Esau and Manasseh, or Ephraim and Manasseh. It was over a bunch of jealousy and rivalry. So because of the need to consolidate their hold on Jerusalem in the vicinity, they needed a group or someone to guard the area. So under these circumstances, this is what produced the first Templars. They called it the Order of the Poor Knights of the Temple of Jerusalem. They were also called the Knights of King Solomon, and it was eventually abbreviated to the Knights Templar. Hugh de Paynes was also the first Grand Master of the Knights Templar. So the Templars were first organized as a charity, actually, and as bodyguards to pilgrims traveling to and from the Holy Land. Originally, they were simply to protect Christians from the robbers and the brigands, the groups that were robbing these pilgrims that were going to the Holy Land. Later, they became one of the most powerful forces, and they fought in some of the biggest battles in the ancient Holy Land and as well as across Europe. The Knights Templar were officially recognized by King Baldwin II of Jerusalem at 1120 at the Council of Nablus. The king assigned tax revenues to the group to keep them clothed and fed. Before this, the Knights were supported from donations from the Order of St. John in the hospital in Jerusalem, and that was known as the Knights Hospitaller, which the Pope approved in 1113. So basically, in spite of this, the Knights were not from poor backgrounds. The original Knights were noblemen. They were very intelligent. Most of them were wealthy or had come from the barons, from the different royalty, the dukes, and it became very popular. And so the wealthy people all across Europe would donate sons or grandsons or different individuals to gain prestige and notability. And just like later, they would send their sons into the become priests. The Knights Templar was a popular organization among the wealthy and among the elite. Anyway, there was a lot of there were many things that happened. They gained a code of conduct. One of their principal oaths they took was of poverty. And in spite of this, the organization itself became very wealthy because they were being donated to by the church eventually, by the hospitallers there in Jerusalem were taking care of them, and later the wealthy started donating money, and as I mentioned, their sons to become knights to help with the organization, to help it to grow. The Grand Master was the absolute rule of the order, and basically once he became a Grand Master, he remained in that position for life. And so basically from 1119 until the fall of Jerusalem in 1191, so basically almost 100 years, the Grand Master was based in Jerusalem. Okay, so from 1191 he was stationed at Acre, and after the loss of Acre in 1291 he was based on the island of Cyprus. Okay, in 1139 Pope the Innocent made a papal bull ruling called Omnite Datum Optimum, or every good gift in Latin, and it placed the Templars under direct protection from the papacy and confirmed the Latin rule. The papal bull or document declared that the Templars did not have to pay taxes or tithes to the church and were free to travel across the borders unhindered. They answered to nobody but the Pope himself. As the Templars grew, it became a wealthy organization. It funded building projects across Europe and the Holy Land, including chapels. The Templar buildings became so widespread, the organization became so wealthy, that a myth emerged that the Templars were the first world bankers. I don't know that was a myth because, as I'm going to mention from another article, some of the things that they did. They had a vast and wide network of property that was sanctioned and protected. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, or the Order of Solomon's Temple, later the Knights Templar. Okay, later they became prominent in Christian finance. Non-combat members of the order, who made up as much as 90% of their members, managed the large economic infrastructure throughout Christendom. They developed innovative financial techniques that were an early form of banking, building a network of nearly 1,000 commanderies and fortifications across Europe and the Holy Land, and arguably forming the world's first multinational corporation. Okay, and then as they got more and more powerful, the King Philip of France and they pressured the Pope to have many of the order's members arrested and tried for some things that they were accused of in their. They were accused of heresy and of other things in their initiation processes, and anyway, many of them were tortured into giving a false confession and burned at the stake. And I believe, and I think history shows, that the reason that this happened was because the King of France was in dire need of finances. Spain was in a bad situation. A lot of these kings needed money, and they saw the Templars as a means of getting the money that they needed. They basically robbed the Templars, and at the same time they were able to weaken them, and because they saw them as a threat to the power of the state, to their military might, and so they basically did the same thing that has done many times in history, is rob those who had the wealth. So basically the Templars were in power from the 1100s up until 1305 for 200 years before leaders of the Templars were arrested and tried for heresy. They invited the Grand Master to France to discuss the matter, and then he was basically arrested on false charges and then tortured to make a confession. They were accused of worshiping idols, to have engaged in homosexual acts and practices. They were charged with numerous other offenses such as financial corruption, fraud, and secrecy. Well, it was the church that made them exempt from tithes and from taxes, and so I don't know how they could say that how they could be guilty of financial fraud and secrecy. They were accused of worshiping a figure known as Baphomet, or a mummified severed head they recovered among other artifacts at Jerusalem that some said was the head of John the Baptist. So I guess it was basically Philip threatened military action unless the Pope complied with his wishes. Pope Clement finally agreed to disband the order, citing the public scandal that had been generated by the false confessions. Many of the Templars around Europe were arrested and tried under papal investigation. It says virtually none were convicted. Some of them were absorbed into other Catholic military orders and pensioned to allow to live their days peacefully. Some of the property of the Templars was transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, except in the Kingdom of Castile, Aragon, and Portugal. Portugal was the first country in Europe where they had settled. The Portugal King Denis the First refused to pursue and persecute the former knights, as had occurred in the other sovereign states under the influence of the Catholic Church. Under his protection, the Templar organization simply changed their name from the Knights Templar to the reconstituted Order of Christ, and also a parallel Supreme Order of Christ of the Holy See, both considered successors to the Knights Templar. Okay, well, things go deeper than that in history. We know that the Jesuits, which were organized later, that they had a lot of things similar to the Knights Templar, and they had a lot of influences. We also know that a lot of the Templars succeeded in fleeing to other areas, to Scotland, to Ireland, and there's a lot of evidence that we have that the Templars made their way over to the New World, to North America and possibly South America. There's evidence that they brought with them many of the artifacts, many of the valuable items from Jerusalem. It's thought or surmised they possibly brought with them the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, and many of the other valuable items that were underneath the temple at Jerusalem. Whether or not this happened remains to be seen. There's some evidence that this may have happened. There's also some evidence that seems to suggest that the Knights may have simply hidden these items more thoroughly underneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and then escaped, making it look like they had taken these items with them. So I'm going to let you be to decide from the evidences that exist whether the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, the physical cup was left in Jerusalem, or whether the Knights took it. There's those, and I'm among those that I talk about, that believe that the actual Holy Grail was the bloodline of Jesus Christ. That it was actually that Mary Magdalene and Jesus were married and had a child, and that the Knights Templar and all the other groups and organizations, the royalty, were also after that bloodline, and to bring into their kingdoms. The Holy Grail has been linked to eternal life. Everybody's seen the Indiana Jones movie about the Holy Grail and the search for it, and so that is a factual thought. That's a factual consideration that the kings and the rulers of the day were seeking for eternal life, to bring that bloodline or that holy grail into their family bloodlines and to seek immortality. And so sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. Only time will tell if there really was a bloodline of Jesus Christ. But there's been some speculation, there's been some evidence that's come forth that it's going to take some time and a little bit of research and documentation to show whether or not there really was that Jesus really did have a child. And what happened to the bloodline of Jesus? Was it brought to America? Was that bloodline taken to Scotland? We know that the Templars went to Scotland. They were there for many years. The Templars, because they were excommunicated from the Roman Catholic Church, they no longer had any connections to the Pope or any responsibilities towards the Church. It's rumored that they helped fight with the Scottish against the English in some of the battles, and that they aligned themselves with Robert the Bruce. Now this is all fairly new information, and there's a lot of people that are skeptical about it, but if you do a deep dive in research, that you can see that some of these things are starting to be a trail of evidence. There's some documents that have started to come out that have been revealed. Some things actually have come out of the Vatican. There were a document claimed to be purchased from the Vatican about the Knights Templar. Some of you may have seen some of the things that Scott Wolter has talked about and researched on America Unearthed, and since he's been doing more of his own research and he's traveled around and talks to groups and has presented some of this evidence. I believe this evidence is factual. I believe that the information that he's shown is truthful, and it's based on years of research, and now they're starting to have artifacts and evidence to support it. So it's only going to be a matter of time to see if these things are if more information comes out and more documentation can be provided. My relatives, my ancestors, the Crawfords, go back to Scotland. I'm related to Sir Reginald Crawford, who was the Sheriff of Ayr. His sister was Margaret Crawford, who was the mother of William Wallace. And if you want to know why you have some interest, some feelings, some thoughts, that you do not understand where those feelings, thoughts, and interests came from, I suggest you look no further than your ancestors, because that information is contained in our DNA. That patriotism, that warrior knight feelings that may be deep within you are rested or come from the thoughts, feelings, and actions of your ancestors. In the animal kingdom, it's been proven that the way animals change and evolve is through personal experiences and through adaptations. And those adaptations and those experiences of the parents of the offspring, that information is literally recorded and passed down in the DNA. So if you want to know why you have a deep sense of patriotism, why you have a deep sense of reverence for freedom, look no further than the thoughts, actions, and deeds of your ancestors. Sir Reginald Crawford was eventually captured by the English, and he was hanged. And he was taken to England and hanged. Those things that happened literally, I believe, come down to us through the DNA of our ancestors. Those thoughts and feelings of patriotism or valor, the thoughts of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that every one of our ancestors and every one of the founding fathers of this great nation had, they were literally witnessed the despicable acts of the English on their family, on themselves, and that's what brought them to come to a land of freedom, to establish freedom, to establish our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those rights are being under attack today, and we're going to have to stand up for those rights, and we're going to have to destroy and drive off the deep state actors that are trying to take away our freedoms. And we're going to have to expose them, expose their evil deeds, expose their secret combinations, their acts of murder, their acts of robbing the American people, of robbing our freedoms a little at a time, to try to create, just as the kings and the leaders of the past tried to destroy the Templars and steal their treasure and consolidate their power. That's the same thing that's happening today, and all over the world. And we're going to have to stand up and fight for our freedoms. So, do I think that the Knights Templars still exist today? No, I don't. I don't think that the original order of the Knights Templar still exists to this day. I believe that their tenets, their ideals, their premises still exist in the hearts and the minds of men. I believe there are organizations that have taken upon themselves these tenets as close as possible. There are organizations that claim to be Knights Templar. The Masonic lodges have many of the same signs, symbols, covenants, and things that went on from the Temple of, passed down from the Temple of Solomon. And these were the same things that the Knights embodied and tried to live up to. They have attempted to, many organizations have attempted to recreate that today. I think one of the evidences, the biggest evidences that the Knights Templar as the complete organization does not exist today, is that America, and this land of freedom, has been a very fertile grounds for freedom. And if the Knights Templar existed today, they could have easily emerged underneath this protection, underneath this open banner of liberty here in America. And yes, there have been a few organizations, as I mentioned, the Scottish Knights, the Masons, the other fraternal orders that exist, and now there's even orders that call themselves the Knights Templar and have started an order on the premise of some of the things that the Knights Templar did. But because of the freedom that was available, because of the open and free country of America, and the period of time that existed between when the Knights Templar seemed to vanish and until today, I do think that it did disappear. I think, honestly, I believe that the Knights Templar were raised up by God for a time such as this. They were raised up for their time to do an important mission in the Holy Land, whether it was preserving the holy artifacts, whether it was allowing the Jerusalem to exist free from Muslim rule for a period of time. Now, once again, Jerusalem is back in the hands of the Jews of Judah. And it's basically the organization of the Knights Templar and the individuals, our founding fathers, who set up this great free country. We have carried the Jews, as it says in Isaiah, as nursing fathers and nursing mothers on our shoulders, and brought them back to the land of Jerusalem as prophesied in Isaiah and Jeremiah and many other places in the Bible. And the Knights Templar were behind that initial process. It took hundreds of years to finally fulfill that promise. They were brought back out of Babylon, out of bondage. And the Knights Templar, I believe, brought the holy things from Jerusalem into Scotland. They were there protected for many years, and then later the Scottish barons that they helped and defended during some of the famous battles. They owed the Templars an allegiance. They helped them take those holy things out of Scotland and to the coasts of land of America, where those things were hidden. And we have evidence that many things were hidden here. Some things have been recovered. As I mentioned earlier, there's evidences that I believe are going to come forth that's going to more accurately tell about these things. I have a site myself that I believe is Knights Templar. And I understand the message that's encrypted on the stone. I don't know what's there, but there is something there, and I have identified that site, and it's very interesting and intriguing. The Knights Templar have basically, from prophecy, have become the American nation, the American people that have carried the Christian church, has brought the Jews back into Jerusalem as was prophesied. And at some point, when Jesus Christ returns again and rules upon the earth, the rest of the promises will be fulfilled to the Jewish people. I believe that the Knights Templar came to America. What was so important about America? Not only became the breadbasket for the world, the protection for the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem, it became a banner of freedom for the rest of the world on how to govern and the freedoms of mankind, but also a part of the lost tribes of the house of Israel were here in America. I believe that the house of Joseph, the Native American tribes, the Native American people, were here on the American continent. When the Knights Templar got here, they brought with them the signs, the symbols, the vows that they took upon themselves, trying to take after the Temple of Solomon. And they found on this land, amongst the Native Americans, the Medowan rituals. How did these rituals that the Native Americans, some of the Native American groups were practicing, how were they aligned very closely with the things that the Templars were doing? How did the Templars move freely on the American continent? It was because these Native Americans saw the Templars and the religion, the things they had with them, aligned very closely to their own beliefs. Some of these groups and these tribes of people claim that they came across on boats, that they came across that they're part of the house of Israel. We have the legend of Quetzalcoatl, the bearded white god, the serpent, the flying serpent. Moses raised up a staff in the wilderness when the people were being bitten by serpents. These asps, these gliding asps that could glide, that were biting the people and killing the people, and he raised up a staff with a brazen serpent on there that represented Jesus Christ. They may not have understood what it meant, but all the people had to do to be saved was to look at this representation of the cross of Christ, and they would be saved. The house of Joseph, the people that were here on America, had amongst them this tradition, this history. This Quetzalcoatl is much deeper than a bearded white god. It goes back all the way to the experience that these people had with Moses, and of that legend of being protected divinely by looking on this serpent that was raised up. When Jesus died and was resurrected, he ascended into heaven with over 500 witnesses who saw him ascend into heaven. According to the legends of the Native Americans, they saw Quetzalcoatl, this bearded white god, descended to them and taught them his gospel and set up his church and his organization among them. This ties into that legend of the flying fiery serpent. The miraculous healing that these people received. That's why many of the Native Americans have the sign or symbol of the serpent in their temples and on their staffs and different things that they had. It talks about in the Bible how Joseph was a fruitful bough by a well whose branches have run over the wall. I believe that was in Genesis or Exodus. I've quoted that before, but somebody can look that up and put it in the comments below. That'd be great. There's another scripture that talks in the Old Testament that talks about that. Take thee 2 sticks and write upon them. It's in Ezekiel 37, I believe. It talks about how take thee 2 sticks and write upon it. One for Judah, the house of Israel, his companions, and one for Joseph, the house of Israel, his companions. We know the record of the children of Judah is the Bible. Where's the record of the children of Joseph? Where is that record that is said is going to be written and brought together, and they are going to be one record in the hands, one nation, no longer divided? Where is the record of the people of Joseph? Where is that? They're part of the lost tribes. That's got to be fulfilled. Those lost tribes have got to be brought back into the house of Israel and returned to their lands of promise. And their records need to be brought forth. Where are their records? Well, I believe that the Knights Templar coming to America was a part of fulfillment of that prophecy, that they brought perhaps the bloodline of Jesus Christ here. Perhaps it's intermingled into the Native American groups and tribes that were here. Perhaps the Templars were intuitive enough or foreseeing enough that they actually brought this bloodline in and brought them into the leaders and the ruling class of these tribes. You know, the Aztec leader Montezuma, there's a lot of discussion about who he was, the original leader. There's legend among the Aztec themselves that he was a bearded white man, a bearded white person who was their original leader. Was this the bloodline of Jesus Christ? Were they referring to Jesus Christ himself? Or was this some other person or individual? So anyway, I believe that the Knights Templars as a group were eventually died out or disappeared. I believe their tenets live on. Many of the things they believed in practice eventually came into the Jesuits, into these other orders that I talked about in Portugal. And I believe as time goes on, we're going to find out more and more evidences about things. Things are going to be discovered here in America that are going to prove even more about the presence of the Knights Templar and some of the things they brought here and they hid. And perhaps even about the bloodline or the Holy Grail, the bloodline of Christ. And so some of the evidences, I guess, that still exist that point to this are some of the things they found on the Oak Island mystery. They're finding crosses, they're finding things that during the time period of the Templars that seem to point to the fact the Templars were there in Nova Scotia. There are symbols carved into the stone all across that area and in eastern United States. As I mentioned, that Scott Walters has brought some of these things out. They've looked at the Kensington runestone, some of these other stones and hieroglyphs. And so I think the plot thickens about the Knights Templar. I think we're going to continue to hear more things about them. And I hope that understanding that I've got of those things, that I have of those things, will continue to expand. It's very intriguing. Anyway, if you like this video, please subscribe and give us a like and share it with your friends. And if you have any information about the Knights Templar or about any of these things, please comment below. Thank you.
Like a Cause we want retribution. Oh yeah, we want retribution. Oh yeah, we want retribution.